Hi, and welcome to this week's solo episode of the Guest List podcast. I'm your host, Steve Guest. Today's podcast is aptly entitled Silence is Golden. And I think this reverts back to a number of years ago when I was training in negotiation as a strategic buyer. And it was a really invaluable training course. It was over 2 or 3 days. And it was to obviously help us to negotiate better, but it was also to learn to be comfortable with silence, to embrace the silence as part of that negotiation, to be able to say a statement and then pause and stop. The idea behind it being generally the person or persons that break the silence are quite often on the losing side of the negotiation. That's not always the case, but it was a general rule of thumb that we work to. And I'm not sure whether it's my character traits or my general demeanour. I am relatively calm and considered in my thoughts. I enjoy the fact that I like to think things through before jumping into a conversation or offering an opinion. So I think it naturally lends itself to perhaps the type of person I am. I'm comfortable with silence. I can quite happily sit there and allow others to talk while I listen. And I know a lot of people struggle with that. My view, I think, with silence is, and this isn't just in a typical negotiation, it could be a conversation as well, is that silence is really important if you really want to listen to the other party, if you want to be able to get them to a position where they feel like they can talk, because you've allowed that space. It also allows you to think a little bit more and potentially offer more considered responses, because you've given yourself that opportunity to take a break and reevaluate, stop, pause, think about how you're going to respond or what you've actually said as part of the discussion. In my experience, when we've got perhaps recruitment consultants that maybe are a little bit nervous or a little bit anxious about what they're trying to get from the conversation with client or candidate, quite often they will try and fill in the silences with words or joining words that bring sentences together. Or they'll ask multiple questions over each question and potentially put the audience, the client or candidate, in a position where they could pick and choose the question that they wish to answer, and maybe avoid the more difficult questions that perhaps put them on the spot and they don't wish to respond to. Because I'm a relatively calm person, I tend to take things perhaps a little bit slower than your typical salesperson. So silence is part of my comfort zone. It's probably my resting space. I'm confident in what I've got to say, and self-confident in the fact that silence isn't something that I need to potentially react to and try and fill with I suppose sentences or conversations that aren't necessarily needed or required. The ability to speak with confidence, ask a question and pause is a really good skill set to have as a recruiter. If you can get into the habit of not trying to rush through your questions or your discussions, asking a question and stop and wait for the response, actually it starts to make it far more powerful in terms of the answers and information that you receive. Small talk and polite chit chat has its place. I get that. But quite often I've got reasons for making a call or meeting with someone, and I want to gain valuable information by asking the right questions and also giving the person that I'm talking to enough space and silence and time to be able to do the same and give that considered answer. I think sometimes people think if things go silent or there is silence, that it's almost seen as a conversation failure. And it definitely isn't if it's a planned silence. It allows for a break. It allows time for reflection. It allows you time to gather your thoughts. And sometimes it can just be a simple sign that you're comfortable in your surroundings, you're comfortable with how you're conducting yourself. And I think for me, I look for those moments in negotiations and conversations because I think it's important. I think back to some of my consultants that I've had over the years. I had one consultant that did used to ask lots of questions. So it might be, what's happening on site, how are things going, what do you need, what would you need me to do, did you pick up the terms? And it's question after question after question, and there's never enough time for that client to respond. So they're either going to pick the last question you ask or the one question that is perhaps more favourable to what they need to answer. And it's learning to be able to ask that question and stop. So we used to have I suppose you could almost say it was a bit of an exercise, but whenever this consultant passed my desk, we made a rule that they had to ask me a question and stop immediately afterwards and start to get comfortable with asking a question and pausing. If you know you're in that area or that position where you struggle with those silences, try and come up with practical tests that you can either do at home or in the office where you start to become more comfortable with that element of silence. It's the same as when you're negotiating fees. You could be saying our terms are 20% of basic salary, for example. The moment you've said that, stop. A lot of people will say things when they're uncomfortable. Our terms are 20% of business. Let me know what you think, or come back to me with any questions. Happy to chat through if you've got any questions. Those sorts of things cover up the fact that the terms are what the terms are, and actually they give a way in for a client to say, well, yeah, okay, let's talk about that, or I'm not happy with that, what can you do on those terms? Because you're automatically showing your insecurity on the rates that you've put forward. So the purpose of this podcast really is just to get you thinking in terms of the way you conduct yourself. Do you make it a habit to reflect on, firstly, what you're going to say or what you have said, and equally what the person that you're talking to has said or is about to say? It's giving yourself that space to be able to offer a considered answer and really think about what you're trying to get across and the information you're trying to gain. Quite often mindfulness, those sorts of exercises can help with this. The ability to accept silence as part of how you conduct the service or the approach that you take, rather than trying to fight it and cover it up with irrelevant sentences or words or I suppose moments where you have to just fill that silence. It actually starts to really help you in terms of your ability to get what you need from it. Try and, I suppose, bolster the insecurities and start to become comfortable with the silences. There are a lot of strategies out there, and I implore you to go and find what works for you. Be comfortable with silence, use it to your advantage, and learn to pause, learn to be more considered in your approach. I think over time I've become better at it because it's something you can practice. So go and have a practice. Let me know how you get on with silences. If you've got questions or you feel like you need to talk more to me, let me know and I'll see what I can do to help. But biggest thing for me is learn to practice. Go and find someone that you're willing to practice with, and go and ask questions. Learn to pause. Make a statement. Learn to pause. Say what your terms are. Learn to pause, and just make silence work for you. I hope that's been useful. I look forward to seeing you next week and chatting more through with our next guest. Take care. Have a good week.